Hi, welcome to my YouTube channel, Dr. Second Chance. I'm Dr. Second Chance, and we're going to go over some ASVAB math and GED math concepts. As you know, the higher you score on ASVAB math, the better job you can get in the military, and you have to know some GED math to obtain your GED, to improve your life, to go on to college, to get a better job. So let's go over some ideas. You may not have thought of these for a while, and of course they're important to review and to practice on your own. So let's start, shall we? So here's a question. What is the product of the square root of 64 and the square root of 25? Well, whenever we see the word product, we need to think we're multiplying two numbers together. So we're multiplying the square root of 64 times the square root of 25. Well, what is the square root of 64? Remember, the square root of a number is a number that times itself equals the number that you're taking the square root of. So I'm looking for a number that times itself is equal to 64, and that would be 8. And I'm looking for a number times itself that would be 25. That would be 5. So 8 times 5 is 40. So that is how you do that question. The product of the square root of 64 and the square root of 25. Again, product means multiply two numbers together. We're taking the square roots. The square root of 64 is 8. The square root of 25 is 5. 8 times 5 is 40. All right, let's put up another question. This will be a question on area. There'll always be area questions. Suppose you have a field and perimeter. Let's say you have a field that's 30 yards by 50 yards. Two common questions that you'll get asked are, what is the perimeter and what is the area of the field? Or a similar shaped object. They may not call it a field. They may call it a garden or a swimming pool or something. So here, that's not exactly drawn to scale, but that's 30 yards wide, and let's just assume this is 50 yards long. I didn't draw that very well. And so when we're asking for the perimeter, we're asking the distance if you walked all the way around the edge. That is the perimeter. The fancy word for perimeter in a circle is called a circumference. And the area is this volume, this amount here that I've shaded. So how do we find first the perimeter? So I'll write the word perimeter. It is the linear length of each side. And so we know that if this side is 30, then this side is 30. And if this side is 50, then this side is 50. And so if we were a guard walking a post, we would be going all along the edge, which is the perimeter, which would be 30 plus 50 plus 30 plus 50. So that would be 30 plus 50 plus 30 plus 50. And that would be 160. And that would be yards. 160 yards, it's a straight line. When we do the area, that's going to be in square yards. And that's really important when you're choosing answers, because sometimes they will put the numerical part of an answer correct, but they'll put yards instead of square yards. And so the area is going to be one side times this side. So the area, you know, some people might mark this as the width, and this is the length, is going to be the length times the width, which is 30 times 50. And what is that, 1,500? Square yards. Square yards. It's the area, so it would be 30 times 50, which is 1,500 square yards. And so this is the concept of calculating the perimeter and the area. Now, what's also important to note, as I said before, is that sometimes they'll give you answers, but with the wrong units. And so the answer, it might say, what is the area? And it'll say 1,500 square yards. Or it may say 1,500 yards. Or it might give the perimeter 160 yards, and I might even say 160 square yards. And so the area would be, the number has to be correct, but also the units, yards squared. So they might put 1,500 yards, but because it's not yards squared, it would be an incorrect answer. And the same thing if they gave a question for perimeter, they could put the wrong unit. So that's just another thing to watch for. Again, the perimeter is the width times the length, plus the length, plus the width, plus the length. The area is the width times the length. The width times the length. All right. So we're now going to go on, and I'm not going just through one section of kind of math. I'm mixing the different kinds of math in here so that you get a smattering of different ideas to think about and to practice. Again, please practice these ideas at home. Okay, so here's a question. What is the largest fraction? Suppose you're given 4 fractions. 3/8, 1/4, 2/5, and 7/8. And they ask you, which one of these is the largest fraction? Common question. The way we do this is we have to find what's called the least common denominator and convert each of the fractions to a fraction that has the least common denominator. The denominator is the bottom number, and then we're able to tell which is the bigger. So the least common denominator in this case would be 40. 8 times 5 is 40. The 4 times 10 is 40. And so looking at the different factors, the lowest common denominator is 40. Now we'll do a separate section on finding the lowest common denominator in more detail. But for this one, 3/8 is 15/40. 1/4 is 10/40. 2/5 is 16/40. And 7/8 is 35/40. See, so, you know, to get from converting from this to this, you multiply the top and the bottom by 5. So 3 times 5 is 15. 8 times 5 is 40. To get 40 on the bottom here, you'd multiply top and bottom by 10. That's how you get 10/40. This is multiplied by 8. 5 times 8 is 40. 2 times 8 is 16. And this is multiplied by 5. And so 7 times 5 is 35. 8 times 5 is 40. And so now that we all have the same denominator, we can compare which one has, and look at which one has the biggest numerator. And that would be this one right here. And so the biggest fraction of these is 7/8. And that's how we do this. So, key that you might want to review, lowest common denominator. Lowest common denominator, figuring out how to get fractions into the lowest common denominator so you can compare them. You also need to have them in the lowest common denominator in order to add them and subtract them. Lowest common denominator. All right, let's look at another question. This is going to be some algebra. This is going to be some algebra, some algebraic questions. You do need to know some algebra for both the GED and the ASVAB. And so let's look at some algebra. So this question is, if you have the equation P equals x squared divided by 6 minus 4, and you're told that x is equal to 12, what is the value of P? So the way we do this is we are going to put in 12 for x there. So let's do that. That's 12 squared over 6 minus 4. Now we're doing this part here first before we do the minus 4, because we have an exponent and we have division. And so those operations come before subtraction. And so 12 squared is 144 divided by 6, all minus 4. So I'm not minusing 4 off 144. I need to do 144 divided by 6, and then whatever that is, I'm going to take 4 off of that. And that's 24, I believe, minus 4. So that this part here, 144 divided by 6 is 24, and minus 4, and that would give us the answer 20. That would give us the answer 20. So review equations where you're putting in a value for one of the variables in order to calculate what the other number will be. And just remember, x's, y's, p's, they just represent a number. It seems weird, but they just represent numbers. Here, x is 12. P here ends up being 20. They just represent numbers. We have letters in here, but they represent numbers. Don't be thrown off by the fact that there's letters used with numbers. The letters just represent a number. All right. Now, another concept, and this is easy points on a test, is when you are asked to calculate what is the cube of a number. And so let's talk about that. Or sometimes the word square of a number or cube of a number. Let's talk about that. If a test says, what is the cube of 2? What that means is 2 times 2 times 2, 3 times. So the cube of 2 is 2 times 2 times 2, which is 8. The cube of 2 is 8. Now this is different than if you're asked, what is the cube root? If you had the cube root of 8, that would be 2. So there's two different terms that are used, and they'll kind of trick you on the test to make you think that they're asking for one when they're not. They're asking for the other one. The cube of 2 is 2 times 2 times 2, which is 8. The cube of 3 is 3 times 3 times 3, which is 27. Excuse me. The cube root of 27 just means what number times itself, a total of 3 times, would give you 27. And that would be the answer 3. So do you see how that works? The cube of 3 is 3 times 3 times 3, which is 27. The cube root of 27 is what number times itself is 27. And that's 3. Cube root, cube. Cube root, cube. Notice different languages, they have some of the same words. Cube of 2, 2 times 2 times 2 is 8. Cube root of 8 is 2. And when it's saying the cube root is what number times itself 3 times gives you 8. And that is 2. Now you've seen this sign here like this. Usually just is used, you see it most of the time for square roots. And so let's talk about that just briefly. Same idea, because sometimes the test tries to fool you into the wrong one. So if you see the square of 2, that means 2 times 2, which is 4. The square of 2, 2 times 2 is 4. The square root of 4, notice no little number there this time. It's understood that they could write it with a little 2 here, but most of the time, written like this, it means it's understood to be the square root. What number times itself is 4? And that's 2. So here, when they're asking the square root, they're giving you this symbol with a number in it, and they're saying what number times itself is that number underneath. That's the square root. The square of 2 is that number times itself. So notice the difference. The square of 2, 2 times 2 is 4. The square root of 4 is 2. Again, part of the word is in the answer they give, or the definition. And so just be aware that, to make sure you understand that there's a difference between when someone asks you for the square of a number versus they ask you for the square root of a number. Let's go on to a different concept. Okay, so let's give an extreme example that they still might ask in order to test your understanding of this whole idea of roots. They might say, what is the 6th root of 64? And the way they might write that is they'll draw the symbol and they'll put 6. So what are they asking? They're asking what number times itself, times itself, times itself, times itself, times itself. What number times itself 6 times equals 64? The 6th root of 64. Well, the answer, and you have to guess a little bit, but if you say the way you'd approach this is, you know, 64 is 8 times 8, and 8 is just 2 times 2 times 2, 2 times 2 times 2, and then you can look at that and say, is there 6 of them? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah. So that is the 6th root of 64 is a number that multiplied itself 6 times, and that answer then would be 2. The 6th root of 64 would be 2. Again, a number multiplied by itself a total of 6 times, 6 numbers multiplied together. So that would be a fancier way of testing whether you understand roots, square root, cube root. They could pick just a weird number here and see if you understand it's some number times itself that many times is the answer. Okay, we're going to do an exponent question. And I'm not trying to in any way discourage you with the examples I'm using. I'm just hopefully teaching you the concepts, but also to encourage you to practice. Practice. Math is like a foreign language. You need to practice it. It builds on itself. Practicing it a bit every day. So if you have y cubed times y squared, what is that? Y cubed times y squared. And how is that different if you had y cubed all squared? And so there's a rule. The answer to this one here is when you have the same base and you multiply a number together with exponents, you add the exponents. So this would be y to the 3 plus 2, which is equal to y to the 5th. Again, the rule is if you have a base, and again, this just represents a letter, and say it's and M it also represents a number. So A represents a letter, M represents a letter, but when you have the same number here, and there's exponents there, then you can add them together. And again, this could be 2 times 2. So let's say A is 2, and M is 2, and N is 3. You can get 2 to the 5th. The rule is you just add them together. Now, what about when you have a number raised to an exponent, and then that whole thing raised to an exponent? In this case, you multiply them. So this would be y 3 times 2, which is 6. And so let's say y was 2 to the 3rd, and this was all squared. This would be 2 to the 6th. So it's different. Do you see how here you have 2 squared times 2 to the 3rd is 2 to the 5th? Here we have 2 to the third, and it's all squared, and that's 2 to the sixth. Because in this case, the rule is you multiply them. In this case, the rule is you add them, the exponents, you add them. So important concepts, a couple really important rules of exponents. And again, real easy points to pick up on a test. You know, if they give you a question, what's 2 squared times 2 to the third, and they give you a choice of 2 to the fifth to answer, that takes a few seconds to answer. You're not straining your brain for 2 minutes, and it gives you time for more questions. These are easy points to pick up. Same with this. If you see 2 to the third all squared, that's 2 to the sixth. It just takes a few seconds to come up with that answer. And again, saving energy in your brain. You may be tired. You know, the thing about tests is that getting an easy question right and getting a hard question right all count the same. And so it's so important to learn to be able to do easy questions after you've practiced it fast. Because part of getting a better score on a test is making sure you get to the easy questions and do them and not get stuck and spend too much time on a hard question, because they're all worth the same number of points. And so if there's a really hard math question, you can just guess and move on to the easier questions and get a whole bunch of them right. And you'll have a much a better day successfully taking the math test. All right. Let's talk about some binomials. This is some algebra and some rules for algebra. Again, the purpose of this review is to prompt you to look at some of your old notes, look at some videos, attempt to and succeed at learning how to do them. And again, it's not made to discourage you in any way at all. So let's say you have a binomial. It just means that there's two terms, a binomial. And you have to multiply these together. And it's going, you have y plus 6 all times y plus 4. So, and then your answers are going to give you a bunch of choices of y squared numbers, a number times y. That's how you're going to do it. So the way you do this question is you use something called the FOIL technique, which tells you how to multiply the terms to generate an answer. F is the first term. So this would be y times y. So that would be y squared. And then the outside terms, this would be y times, you're multiplying it times 4, plus 4y. And then the inside term, which is the I in FOIL, first term, outside terms, inside terms, that would be 6 times y, which would be 6y. And then lastly, the last terms, 6 times 4. And notice that's positive 6 times positive 4, which is 24. And then things that are the same, we can add, subtract, multiply, and divide. And so here we have a 4y and a 6y, so we can add those together. That's a 10y. And that would be our answer. Y squared plus 10y plus 24. Expanding that out with the FOIL method. And your choices, they'll give you, there'll be 4 of them there, and they'll ask you to pick the right one. So one of them would be that. They might put y squared minus 10y plus 24. They might put y squared plus 10y minus 24. They might put y squared minus 10y minus 24. They might, they're going to generate some wrong answers, but you'll have to pick this one from the list. So that's the FOIL method for expanding a binomial. I think we're going to do one more of those because that's really super important. So we use a different letter. Let's do x plus 5 all times x plus 4. So, and they're saying multiply this times this to get an answer that's got multiple terms in it, like we did on the last example. So using the FOIL method, it tells us which order to multiply these, and you don't have to do it this way, but it's a way that works really, really well. So we'll finish on this. So we multiply the first terms, which would be x times x, which is x squared. Then O is the outside term, which would be x times 4, so that would be 4x. And then the inside, which would be 5 times x, which is 5x. And then finally, the last terms, which would be 5 times 4 plus 5 times plus 4, which is plus 20. And then these terms here we can combine. So our final answer would be x squared plus 9x plus 20. And that's using the FOIL method. And so please review the FOIL method. It'll really help you get some easy points on the math test. That's all we're going to cover today. I encourage you, please watch some videos, practice at home, go into these tests prepared, and remember, don't get hung up too much with hard questions. If you don't know it, just move on to the easier ones. The test has lots of easy questions. The trick is getting to them rather than getting either bogged down on a hard one or discouraged or running out of steam and being mentally tired. So a major strategy, get to easy questions. That's all it for today. We'll see you next time. Dr. Second Chance saying bye. And please like, share, and subscribe to the channel.